Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and welcome back again to Diablo 4 and Season 6, it's Vessel of Hatred. And yet, we were able to play it slightly early thanks to Blizzard, and with that we're producing a bunch of leveling guides to give you new builds to work in, to use to power yourself through the leveling experience, all the way to the new cap that is 60, and importantly, as you're seeing me here do, complete your first Pit Tier 20, which will unlock Torment level 1, which is essentially the beginning of the end game. So for that and Necromancer, I want to provide you with a build that is not only new and fun, but also very effective at getting you there. And I'm excited to say, as you can see, I'm playing Sever instead of the usual stuff, which is pretty much Blood Surge every time. This is easily competitive with Blood Surge, and because it means you get to use your new ultimate ability, Soul Rift, I really recommend it. It's a fun ability to use, and it's nice to not use Bone Storm. Here's a quick rundown of the abilities, what we're using and why. The main ultimate ability is of course Soul Rift. What this does is it generates this AoE around you, and it sucks the souls out of targets nearby. With the modifiers that I have, as you can see, it's going to increase the damage that I deal up to 30% times as I continuously absorb souls. And it's a fantastic instant source of vulnerable as well. So while I'm near enemies, it's ripping the soul from them, it's giving me essence, which is important, and a barrier. Also, it's darkness damage. So it synergizes really well with the build and the aspects that we run. You could basically view it as, I press this, I become survivable, I deal way more damage, and I make everything vulnerable as well. The key damage source then is of course Sever, which has received some buffs over like the last patches. And it's really starting to feel it now in Season 6. If you're unaware, they took the primary damage and increased it from 80% to about 110%, and the secondary damage from 30 to 45. So basically, you press it, it goes somewhere, it does damage, it comes back, does damage. So the first hit hits harder, the comeback hit hits harder too. They also buffed this aspect right here. You now have a greater chance when using Sever to generate a pool of blight that deals now more bonus damage, and that can happen every 3 seconds. But it can repeatedly spawn blights to help me generate darkness for Shadow Blight key passive. But also, if you do take a skill like that and you're putting it down, we can benefit from something like Supernatural Blight, which is just giving us a big damage increase to those affected by it. It really helps in single target, and AoE when it does proc, of course. Around that, it's what you should expect. Corpse Explosions is a darkness option to help with Shadow Blight stacks. Corpse Tendrils for the pull-in, the vulnerable, and with Grasping Veins, the damage increases that provides. And we're not running Decrepify, we're running Iron Maiden because you should when you're leveling. This means it doesn't actually cost essence, so I can infinitely press it, applying Curse to everything around me at all times for a damage boost. And then, every time that I apply it freshly to a target, that generates 5 essence per enemy. So while you're leveling, really helps your essence gen, since we're spamming a core skill that is pretty expensive on it. But don't forget, while you're draining with Soul Rift and damaging enemies, that generates essence too. So when Soul Rift's going, and I've got Iron Maiden spammed, I don't really have to worry about essence too much. Though I do run one aspect to help me with that, as we'll talk about. So that's the basis of the Sever leveling build. Making use of darkness, Shadow Blight key passive, the new ultimate skill Soul Rift, which feels great, and just basically spamming Severs into targets. There's also a new aspect you might want to consider. The Reaping aspect means Sever no longer returns to you, but instead sort of expands out and deals slightly less than normal damage. As you can see, this is what it looks like when I use it. It sends it and then sends 3 out from the target location, then it spins on the spot. I actually think this is really good, but it's difficult to fit both into a build, as we'll talk about in the aspect section. Getting all these benefits of empowering means I'm dropping blights to help me generate my key passive, and with Supernatural Blight, that's a pretty big damage increase. To have both is pretty awesome, and so you might actually find this aspect while you're leveling, and yeah, I'd recommend it. But yeah, the basis for any good leveling build, in my opinion, is its ability to crush through what you're currently doing, which will be the campaign, and this certainly can do that. And then the kind of final tier for it is if it can do a tier 20 effectively. As you can see, it most certainly can. This will get you to the point where you're in the endgame, ready to really enhance a build and set up a proper endgame build. Okay, so let's do the rundown of everything you need to know. I'm actually going to start with the Book of the Dead because obviously this is an important caveat. When you're leveling, you're going to start with summon skeletons. And as you level up, you'll get your mages. And at 25, you get your golem. Initially, your bars are empty and the skeletons are really effective early. So you don't want to sacrifice anything. Then once you reach the point when you're down in your skill bar that you actually have, full slots and you could do with the extra slot that's being taken up by summoned skeletons, roughly around 25 or so, that's when you drop them completely. And when you're ready to do that, this is how I sacrifice them. So for skeletal warriors, it's Reapers for the shadow damage increase, of course. Mages, it's Cold, that's vulnerable damage increase. And then golems, as always, it's Iron Sack for the critical strike damage increase. Pretty standard stuff, and so that's when I make that adjustment. For the skill tree then, we start with your basic. You will be running these. Although I'm using Reap right now for the classic Acolytes Reap, so we can always start a fight by sending out a reap, spawning a corpse instantly, corpse tendriling. That's the usual rotation. However, while you're leveling, I must admit I love Decompose. It's a fantastic essence gen, and we are pretty starved for essence early. And if you take it to initiates, it's also an amazing movement speed increase, which is diabolical for Necromancer in general, but especially during leveling. So swap between these two, use what feels better in the moment. On the next tree then we have our cores, maximizing sever, and of course taking it to paranormal, making it a vulnerable gen. Now you have your main core skill. Here we have 3 points spent for blight, 1 point in blight, enhanced, and taken to supernatural. That's giving the big damage increase to the targets affected by blight. You do not want to put these 3 points here until you specifically have the empowering reaper aspect. That's what's causing sever to spawn blights, and without this aspect, there's no reason for you to spend those points in the skill tree. So until you have that aspect, don't put your 3 points here. Other than that, it's the usual 3 points in Hued Flesh for the chance to generate corpses. Next up, we have our Corpse Explosion. I actually recommend you put 5 points into this early because it's going to be a nice damage source. But long term, all we want it for is the stacking darkness, which we're getting by taking it to Blighted. So initially 5 out of 5, but you can drop those points later when we're, beyond that. Otherwise, it's classics of maximizing Fuel by Death so you get extra damage when consuming corpses, and also helping with the Essence gen with maxing Grim Harvest. Also here we have Spiked Armor. Again, the armor that this provides is going to be great later in the game, but you save these 3 points until later. You'll note there's some new stuff here though, like Necrotic Fortitude and Titan's Fall. Both are pretty cool and not relevant for our leveling build. On the next tree then, it is where we pick up Iron Maiden, and we want to enhance this as fast as possible, meaning it no longer costs essence and now works as a way to generate essence. Very important for pretty much every Necromancer build. While they're in the leveling phase, an essence gen is a bit of a pain. Since it is indeed a curse though, as always, you max out Amplify damage to increase the damage you deal to everything you curse with Iron Maiden. Here we also have Death's Embrace. This is going to reduce damage taken from close enemies and increase our damage to them. Again, this is one we'll take later when we have the points spare. Much like Death's Approach, which is just flat movement speed. Nice to have, that's for sure, but not important. On the next tree, we have things that are important. As you should expect, Corpse Tendrils and Taken to Plague for it to be a vulnerable gen, and your shadow passives, where we have 1 point Reaper's Pursuit just to get to the real passives of maximizing Gloom and Terror, which will actually improve our damage. Coming down to the next tree then, we're already at the ultimate, where we have Soul Rift. You want to pick this up and take it to Prime. So Supreme's going to make it so it's a damage increase the longer and more souls it steals. And then Prime is what's also making it a vulnerable gem. And also in Vessel of Hatred, you can put 5 points into ultimate skills now. So of course you want to maximize Soul Rift. At this point, you should be sacrificing your minions so you're ready to take full standalone and Memento Mori as always, but you will notice a new passive here, Finality. You deal 15% times increased damage for 8 seconds after casting an ultimate skill. We're pretty much pressing this on cooldown, so why not take a big damage increase? This then brings us to the key passive, which is Shadow Blight. Shadow damage infects enemies with Shadow Blight, increasing the shadow damage they take. This is a huge deal when you specifically have the blighted aspect. You deal massive increased damage for 6 seconds after the Shadow Blight key passive triggers 10 times. So that's when this really starts to feel good, the combination of those two. You might be wondering about the new key passive though, Affliction. Enemies affected by vulnerable, crowd control, and shadow damage over time are afflicted, taking increased damage from you and your minions. Your curse skills also apply shadow damage when applied to afflicted enemies. So by no means is this a bad option while you're leveling, and if you want to give it a try, I recommend it. But when you have Blighted, Shadow Blight is amazing, and in general, it's a very good key passive. Now you might be wondering, why am I missing 4 points? Well, that's because I'm playing an early version of the game and not on my own characters, which means they've reset my renown, which means I'm missing skill points. I am missing 4 points total. Here is where I would put them. I will put 3 points in Necrotic Carapace and 1 point into Crippling Darkness, so there's that chance my darkness skills will stun. And that is where the remaining 4 points would go. Next up, we got to talk about Paragon. As you can see, I have points from my other class that I've been playing, but I didn't want to use any of that to showcase how strong this is and, getting the tier 1 unlocked. So what I've got here is the first glyph that they give you, which is Eliminator, to be the exact same thing you'll have when you're hitting 60. It's not good, but it's the option they give you. So you get that activated like so, and I come down and around to make sure I get Prime and Resilience and the nodes around that. As you'll find, resistance to all elements is way more important now because the difficulties as they scale will reduce the amount of resistances you have, and it gets horrible. But there's your first Paragon board just to get you started. Now it's time to talk about gear. When you're leveling, you're not going to get all the aspects you want. But fortunately, a few of them are in Codex, so you can go get them, like Grasping Veins, for example. So, for your helmet, your chest, and your legs, you are taking defensive options. It's whatever you find. This is not good, but it's better than nothing. Same for the protecting option. It's whatever you randomly find. So I happen to have disobedience and protecting and crowded sage on mine. It's barely relevant, you'll be fine. What you do have control over is your resource and your offenses. So on my gloves, I've got grasping veins, a classic option to give us extra critical strike chance and damage to those affected by the tendrils. It's always a good option, and there's argument for putting this on your amulet just to increase the perks of that early, because it is quite impactful. But at very least have it, you can get it in the codex. For boots then, it's literally whatever mobility aspect you can get that works well for you while continuously upgrading the boots. There are tons for Necromancer now, because Necromancer's movement speed is terrible, and their only current solution is to give us aspects on boots, which is a pretty heavily contested spot with uniques, so use them while you can. What does matter again though is offensive. So on my two-hand sword here, we have Damned, which means I deal increased shadow damage to enemies affected by any curse. We apply our Iron Maiden curse to everything. So this is always going, it's straight increasing our damage, all damage. So it's really hard to beat while leveling. Obviously you're changing your weapons a lot though, so it's probably a bad idea to imprint. That's why I'm showing you Damned as a great offensive option, as well as the Twin Blade, the Reaping one, and Empowering Reaper. When you have them, it's great. On the amulet though, we have Blighted, which again, you can pick up in the codex, and this will make your Shadow Blight key passive much more relevant as a damage increaser, so there's no excuse not to have it once you have Shadow Blight. For the rings though, we have Umbral as my one resource gen option. So every time I land CC, I'm getting a lot, especially in AoE, a lot of resource back. This helps me manage during mobbing, especially early. But you know, there's a few aspects in regards to resource gen. As long as you have one, it'll make a big impact. And lastly, again, we have Empowering Reaper, so that our Sever is dropping Blight onto targets. And that's also a big damage increase, thanks to my skill tree. The only other aspect I want to highlight is Cursed Aura. A dark aura surrounds you, inflicting Decrepify and Iron Maiden on enemies who touch it. Curses inflicted this way spread to surrounding targets. This is phenomenal, really nice utility. So if you happen to have this for a while here or there, it is really nice. Next up then, let's talk about runes. Runes, in my experience while doing the campaign and leveling up 2 characters now, are random as hell. They don't seem to drop nearly as much as they should, and I'm hoping in the live version that you guys play, they will drop a lot more. So essentially, I am running what I was given, which was very limited. I have one that's giving me critical strike chance. Regularly as I cast Evade, I generate the offering for that. And I have another, which is helping me restore primary resource, because I want resource to spam Sever, right? And the builder for that is inflicting any crowd control that's not a slow or chill, so, you know, every time I press Corpse Tendrils. Honestly, you're not going to have many options. You just run what you're given and what's relevant to the build. For mercenaries, you'll see I'm running Rahir. He's hard to beat when you're gearing up and leveling especially. Here's his skill tree. You have Valiance, which means when you would take 15% of your current life and damage, he comes and negates it, knocking enemies down and giving you unstoppable, which is amazing. Ground Slam slams the area, it makes a circle like Earthquake, and the enemies within are slowed. We enhance that on the left side to get resistance to all elements just permanently, which is wonderful. And I take Bastion. He creates a bubble that redirects 90% of the damage that would be dealt to you to himself for 5 seconds. Amazing. This also grants Unstoppable for 1 second. But most importantly is Inspiration below that. Enemies affected by the Ground Slam, the circle on the AoE does a lot, they take increased damage, and then also as part of this, allies affected by the Bastion, the bubble, we deal way more damage while we're standing in it. So it's a ridiculously good skill passive. So he's incredibly hard to beat for most builds in the game, and especially during the leveling up process. For the second, it's up to you. I'm running Vayana, specifically with Bloodthirst, because that provides me with 10% attack speed regularly. It's got a 22-second cooldown, and so I just have it proc whenever I press Soul Rift, so I get that nice double up, allowing me to send out Severs way faster. So yes, that's Sever leveling in Vessel of Hatred. You'll be applying Iron Maiden to everything and using it as a great way to generate loads of essence. You'll open a fight likely with Reap to generate a corpse so you can corpse tendril them, putting a bunch of enemies in one spot so you can put a corpse explosion under them, instantly generating a lot of Shadow Blight. Then you begin to spam Sever into that pack of enemies, killing them really quick. If there's elites or you just happen to really want to, you can press your ultimate Soul Rift for a big damage increase, a vulnerable gen, essence gen, which means you can just spam Sever while it's going, especially relevant in bosses. So you want to set up fully, then press Soul Rift, and then begin dumping Severs into the target to make the most of that period where, you know, you kind of have more essence than you need. That's how I do single target against bigger enemies, but it feels amazing whenever I press Soul Rift to be able to do that. And that's the rotation. And overall, that's my guide to leveling with Sever and this build in Vessel of Hatred. I hope this answered all the questions you might have had. It's nice to finally have something other than Blood Surge to level with. So for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in Vessel of Hatred.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.